Welcome to the Al-Attiyah Foundation's new podcast series where experts share their insights on current and urgent energy matters for the benefit of our members and the general community. My name's Naweed Jabakil and I'm joined today by Dr. Marcello Contestabile, Principal Economist at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute. Dr. Marcello's research interests revolve around understanding future technology transition pathways in fuel-efficient transport, particularly low-emission passenger cars, in order to inform policies that are both effective and efficient. Before we start this session, I'd like to remind all of our listeners to please visit the Foundation's website at www.abhafoundation.org and follow the Foundation on Twitter at Al-Attiyah FN. So what are we talking about today? Well, the energy transition to net zero carbon emissions is gradually taking shape. The final fuel mix will be diverse with many different local solutions probably in place all around the world. Today, we'll look a little closer to home and where economic research is leading towards local solutions for Qatar by discussing the topic with one of the leading experts from the Institute. Good afternoon, Marcello, and welcome once again to an Al-Attiyah Foundation activity.
Good afternoon to you and everyone, and thanks a lot for having me today.
So before we go ahead, Marcello, for our listeners and some overseas listeners, let's start with a brief description of the Institute. Where does it sit within the wider Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar?
Yes, so QEERI is the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, which is the leading multidisciplinary research institute in Qatar in the areas of energy, water, and the environment. As you said, it is part of Hamad bin Khalifa University, which is member of Qatar Foundation. And at the institute, through our scientific, technological, economics, and policy research, we seek to provide solutions to the climate change and sustainability challenges that Qatar and other arid regions face today.
And Marcello, over recent years, some of your studies have concentrated on the electrification of Qatar's transport systems. I mean, we look at the metro, for example, as one big, large-scale example of electrification. But what about private cars and individuals and their behavior? The majority of car owners still love private cars, private transportation, and particularly those gas guzzlers, the 4x4s and SUVs. Can we change that?
Yes, absolutely. Very important point. Changing the way people travel around Qatar in terms of modes of transport is not going to be easy. Public transport provision is important, but we need to address emissions from passenger cars as well, because they will remain an important share of transport. And electrification is one way of doing that. It's an important way that Qatar is strategically planning to pursue. But it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be quick, because as you were correctly saying, in Qatar, we love our cars, we love our SUVs, and the problem is that fuel taxation is non-existent. There is no taxation on vehicles to reflect their emissions, and there are no standards to force the fuel economy of the vehicles to improve. So effectively, there are no drivers towards very low emissions and very high efficiency. That's what electrification gives you. So we can get there eventually, but the policy framework around passenger cars needs to change. And at the same time, adopters, users of passenger cars have a very important role to play, because they are the ones who will eventually buy them. So they need to become familiar with the technology. They need to develop a positive perception of it, and that will take time and will take commitment from the government. But starting from public transport is the right way to go. So not just a metro system, but also buses. So if people see electric buses around town and they start using them, that will make them more familiar with the technology, and it will help eventually.
And just looking at individual users, is there resistance to moving towards electric cars, or is it simply just a fact of economics? If they see that this is going to save them money in the long term, it's something that they will be willing to do.
Yes, this is another key, if you like, element to look at. When you look at passenger car buyers, they are very heterogeneous. So there might be a small group of them who is prepared to pay a premium to buy a vehicle that is more environmentally friendly, and we call them innovators or early adopters. But to really make inroads, you need to convince the mainstream users to buy electric vehicles. And the mainstream users are really not necessarily all that motivated by environmental considerations, or at the very least, they're not prepared to pay a premium. So you have to make the vehicle not just effectively economically attractive, but you also have to ensure the adopters that the vehicle will provide similar functionality that is reliable and that is durable. And with today's electric cars, especially in this part of the world, that's still some way away.
And in terms of you mentioned the government's role, are subsidies the right way to go? Do you think you've seen in Europe, for example, a lot of governments try and subsidize electric vehicles? Is that what you think is the best option?
Yes, subsidies or grants are key, are essential, but they need to be part of a broader set of policies. So subsidies fall in the so-called demand side policy, because they reduce the price differential between a conventional vehicle and an electric vehicle. So it will make it more attractive for a potential adopter to buy the car. You also need to deploy charging infrastructure, and you need other taxation more generally to reflect the cost of emissions from conventional vehicles. So it's not just grants to electric cars, but it's also making the other vehicles more expensive. And lastly, but not less importantly, you have to look at the supply side. So you have to effectively push the car manufacturers to produce vehicles that are more fuel efficient. So in Europe, a big part of the drive to electrification is in fact fuel economy standards. They are becoming so stringent that car manufacturers are more and more forced to introduce at least partly electrified vehicles to meet the targets. And in Qatar right now, we have none of all these.
Yeah, but certainly areas that can be developed, I think, and countries across the region clearly looking at them. But it's not just cars. Once we step into offices and homes, for example, lots of other areas that can possibly be tackled as well. Batteries are one of them. Most standard batteries, the lead acid ones that we know, have a really notoriously short life. We're taking them out of remotes or other things, particularly in hot, humid, saline atmosphere that we've got in parts of the Middle East, like in Qatar. Will lithium-ion batteries have a longer life, do you think? Is that another area that needs to be explored?
Yes, lithium-ion batteries, be they for vehicles or stationary power storage, they can be made to last longer, for sure. And it's about the chemistry, picking the right chemistry. There is more room for maneuver when it comes to stationary applications. When it comes to passenger cars in particular, you need very high energy density. So you are a bit more constrained. And very, very important is also the thermal management of the battery. That means cooling it. So batteries here, especially in vehicles, will most likely require active cooling. That means liquid cooling. But generally speaking, the answer to your question is yes, lithium-ion batteries will not suffer as much as lead-acid batteries and can potentially be adapted to these climates as well.
And I know a lot of our listeners are interested in industrial use, in particular, looking at heavy industry. Let's look at heavy transport buses and trucks then. The construction sector, for example, hugely important in Qatar, but industrial use as well, things like oil and gas. Well, we need something different to the standard lithium-ion battery cells currently used. And does this bring us to the subject of maybe something we've spoken about before at the Foundation, hydrogen fuel cells?
Okay, so something different from lithium-ion batteries. First of all, let me just add that the lithium-ion battery technology is like really a family of chemistries, and they can be made to meet the needs of different applications. There are trade-offs, so you cannot have everything at the same time, but for specific applications, you can always choose the right kind of battery. This said, when you look at batteries and hydrogen fuel cells, they are rather different technologies. So where, if you like, batteries naturally fall short, that's where there can be an opportunity for hydrogen and fuel cells. When talking about fuel cells in particular for vehicles, where they make most sense is long-haul heavy-duty vehicles, because to store enough energy in batteries would mean a hugely sized battery that costs a lot and reduces the payload of the vehicle. So that's where hydrogen fuel cells can really be a good bet. So long-haul trucks, for example, this is one area where, for example, in Europe, industry and governments are looking at. But again, the conditions here in the Gulf are very different. You look at long-haul trucks in the Gulf, and they tend to be older vehicles, most likely second-hand vehicles that come from the European market. And so there is currently no incentive to modernize the fleet, even before you start considering new technologies altogether, because fuel price is low and there are no standards. But again, lots of scope potentially for future use of hydrogen fuel cells in trucks.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting because you rightly say that it's something that we see quite a lot of, not just in Qatar. That's the importance of things like this. These solutions really are transferable to other countries across the region. You mentioned opportunity there, that it could be a potential opportunity. I mean, we put on our chemistry hats. I'm going to talk about hydrogen as a transportation or even a generation fuel. Will Qatar be able to produce sufficient what's known as green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, do you think?
Okay, certainly blue hydrogen for Qatar is the obvious one. There is massive potential for blue hydrogen, and the constraint there might be mainly the availability of carbon capture and storage sites. Not that they are not available, but it's something that one needs to consider carefully. So lots of potential for blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen, on the other hand, in Qatar in particular, is more limited simply because you have one renewable source of power, which is solar. And if you want to go towards solar in Qatar and try and meet the needs of like the power sector first, then that's the obvious first use of power, of renewable power, because it's more efficient to use it directly where electricity is needed than to turn it into hydrogen and use it for something else. If you really develop solar to a scale where you are meeting pretty much all the needs of the power demand in Qatar, demand for electricity, first of all, you're already looking at deploying such a large amount of solar that will take a big chunk of Qatar's land. My colleagues at QEERI have estimated that if you want to deploy enough solar PV to meet peak power demand in Qatar in the summer, you're going to need to use around 15% of Qatar's land, which might not sound like much, but considering that there's lots of other uses for land, and not all sites, by the way, enjoy the same level of irradiation, then you can see that there isn't an awful lot left for green hydrogen. Surely, if you get to that sort of level of PV penetration, you will have times during the year where you have excess PV power, which you can then turn into hydrogen, and you can possibly use that for transport. But as I said, the green hydrogen potential in Qatar, unlike, for example, Saudi Arabia, which is a very different country in terms of size, is quite limited.
Yeah, that's a very interesting fact. 15%. I wouldn't have thought that it would be as high as that. But the hydrogen space and the conversation around hydrogen is something that's really growing in the region, I sense. Just for our listeners, we do have some of our previous podcasts have looked specifically at hydrogen, issues around green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and the difference among them. So please do have a look at some of our previous ones if you're specifically interested in the area. But some fossil fuel rich countries at least, talking of using hydrogen now as the next fuel export, Marcello, perhaps converting methane to ammonia, for example. The conversation so long in the region has been oil and gas. I mean, could hydrogen be the next LNG, do you think, for Qatar?
Right. So I would say probably not the next LNG, but certainly an important part of where Qatar is headed. And it's not just Qatar. Saudi Arabia, in different ways, is headed in the same direction. And the recent announcement of both Saudi and Qatar joining the Net Zero Producers Forum certainly suggests that Qatar will be developing its hydrogen sector to an extent, or to a significant extent. And just to give this a little bit more context, this announcement is if you like, the natural evolution of a certain direction in which these countries are going, where they have realized that they need to do, first of all, a country like Saudi in particular has woken up to climate change and finally decided to just not like sweep it under the carpet and do something about it. Qatar was already playing a role through its LNG exports, LNG being, if you like, or natural gas being the least carbon intensive fossil fuel and helping in the energy transition. But it is quite clear that in a net zero world, that's not enough. And the concept that has been developed in Saudi and that now Qatar is also embracing is that of like the circular carbon economy, where hydrogen plays a part. So hydrogen will not be the next LNG for Qatar, but is going to be an important element of gradually reducing the carbon content of its export, which will not be just LNG, which are not only LNG. Qatar exports fertilizers, it exports steel, and hydrogen allows reducing, blue hydrogen or green hydrogen allow reducing the carbon content of all its exports. So it becomes a broader and more diversified picture than just LNG.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting time to be looking at the considerations for governments in the region with these net zero targets, not just in the region, all across the world. It's no longer just the economics that matter, but so many other things that drive decisions now around energy use. I mean, we could talk about this for much longer, but I think our time's up for today. Marcello, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, for sharing your views with us on what fuels to look out for in the future, and also what people in Qatar and across the region can be doing to change behaviour as well. For the listeners, thank you very much. Please watch this space for the next Al-Attiyah podcast in the series. I'm Naweed Jabakil. Thank you and goodbye.